I was sort of always going to be a journalist. I did, when I was tiny at school, I used to carry around a recorder, and used to do off my own back, and I did a sort of newspaper, recorded one and distributed around the classrooms, and always worked on school papers and things. My mother was a huge film fan all her life, and started taking me very early, and we watched many, many, many films together, and. She liked movies so much she would think nothing of taking me out of school on a Wednesday afternoon and give them some, say I was going to the dentist or something, and we'd go see something that she wanted us to see together. So I went to university as a film student. I then switched to journalism and from film to journalism and sociology because I never actually wanted to be a filmmaker. I was interested in the cultural impact of film, really. But I was a rock journalist first. In my checkered career, I was a rock journalist, and then I worked for in the music industry as a publicist. Then I worked in the film industry as a publicist, and then some old mates of mine who, from rock journalist days, just got this idea to start a film magazine, and they wanted to pick my brains about. If they went to LA, who should they call? Who were the PRs? Blah blah blah. And they took me out to lunch to thank me for a lot of information, and then they said, would you be interested in writing for us? And the next thing I know, I was a launch consultant on Empire magazine for launch, and I've been writing for them ever since. So that's been great fun. And then other people started asking me to do things, so here I am.
And do you make a living now from film journalism, or do you have a day job?
I do just about scrape by and make a living. Although I always warn students who ask me this, and aspiring journalists, that if you want to one day buy a house or raise children, you probably need to think about a wider career. I mean, they always when I was studying journalism, they always said you can't plan on a career as any specific kind of journalist, whether it's an arts journalist or an economics journalist or whatever, because things change, and this was a long time ago. You have to be able to turn your hand to different things. And if I hadn't done all the other things I'd done first, I don't know if I'd ever have been able to buy my place and that sort of thing. I also meet a lot of cineasts who are terribly enthusiastic and passionate about very specific kinds of films. And I warn them, if you hope to make a living writing in-depth analyses of, Iranian cinema or world cinema or even just, or horror films or whatever, you think again. You can do that for love, and some people will pay you something for it, possibly, if you're lucky. But film criticism is, like films themselves, usually regarded as a form of commercial entertainment. And you have to be able to turn your hand to and enjoy all kinds of films. You have to be able to go to a popcorn film and see it for what it is, as well as the latest, masterpiece of world cinema from the other side of the world. Film criticism is, I think it's undervalued by most people, especially these days, but I think that the purpose and the value of film criticism is to put films into perspective, to not just convey what sort of a film it is in hopefully an interesting and reasonably readable and entertaining fashion, but to comment on what the film says about where we are or who we are or what we are. I think that the arts in general, but most obviously movies, have been subsumed into commercial entertainment. And commercial entertainment means that they're selling you something. And if you get away, if you eliminate, as the film companies try very hard to do these days, if you eliminate criticism and you rely on the show business reporters who get the interviews with the movie stars and whatever, if you take away the voice who might just say, excuse me, hang on a minute, this movie actually stinks, or there are things about this movie that you should know, or there are things about this movie that you should think about, then you devalue it totally. It's the most obvious thing is product placement in films. You know, you're being chased by zombies, but you stop at a soft drink machine to get a Pepsi to refresh yourself before you carry on running. That's the most blatant sort of thing. But you can also see it in the proliferation of franchise films. I have nothing against, you know, the comic book hero movies and the young adult dystopia movies, but they do tend to squeeze out other things at the multiplexes. And I saw James Schamus made a wonderful remark in a recent BAFTA lecture. He said, Hollywood's only interested now in making movies that 20-year-old Chinese people want to see. And there was something to that. On the other hand, I'm sounding so negative. I do think cinema internationally is in a really healthy state because the technology has now enabled so many people to do their own thing, and you don't actually need $100 million to make a movie. People have proven they can make movies on their computer in their garage. I just think that critics are very valuable for films that don't have huge machines behind them. They don't have the hype industry behind them, and the studios and the distributors may not need us to tell people give people the benefit of our expertise on the latest Avengers movie, but emerging filmmakers and documentary makers and filmmakers working outside of the English-speaking world still need the critics to bring their work to the attention of audiences.
So you'd say that advocacy is one of the chief values of film criticism.
Advocacy is a benefit of film criticism. There are many filmmakers, and always have been, who really owe their careers to being championed by film critics. And people like Quentin Tarantino and Wes Anderson will tell you, because they've told many people, that reviews by Pauline Kael inspired them and informed them about filmmaking as much or more than a lot of the films they were watching. And a lot of people Mike Lee, just zillions of filmmakers in this country have benefited from being championed earlier in their careers by the likes of Dilys Powell or Alex Walker or whoever. Rave reviews and awards from critics help people get their next film made. And I think we're kinder. I think critics in general tend to be kinder to first-time films, to small films, to inexpensive films that have some imagination and have some ambition and some imagination. I think we are harder, and rightly so, on films that cost £400 million to make, and another £400 million is spent on flying the stars around in jets and throwing press junket beanos. And I think if they're spending that kind of money, it better be good. Show me the money.
I wonder, you mentioned the influence of critics like Dilys Powell and Pauline Kael on actual filmmakers, and how there's this kind of two-way communication between critics and filmmakers, where filmmakers themselves will read critics and that will affect their work. It's obviously very hard to look at the present in historical terms, but do you think that there are still critical voices like that today, as strong as, say, Pauline Kael's, or is it just impossible to know that now?
I think it's hard to know if there are any critical voices on that level now. It's funny because there's a shrinking, there are shrinking venues for professional critics. A lot of papers have dispensed with their services altogether. In America, a lot of papers run syndicated columns by somebody who, lives 3,000 miles away from that region. And they're paying less and less, and they're giving it to the jobs to younger and younger people so that they don't have to pay seasoned journalists. But everybody's a critic. It's the old cliche. Everybody who's on, look at social media. People tweet, people go on Facebook, they go on Instagram, they go on whatever. You have people blogging incessantly. So there's a conversation about film going on all over the place. the problem with that is a lot of it is not informed and it doesn't have perspective. And this is why the film production companies have become so paranoid. They want journalists to sign embargoes before you go into something, saying, you'll lose your children and your house if you tweet anything about this film, even if you liked it, before 5 minutes before its opening. There aren't many avenues for this conversation between the filmmaker and the film critic anymore. There aren't many papers, there aren't many magazines that give you the space to really, really analyze something. And there are a lot of editorial people and publishing people in the media who do not actually care about the arts and culture. They want film criticism, like everything else, to be snappy and a little sarky. That's the prevailing tone now, to be disdainful and snide about almost everything. And there's an argument for writing about film entertainingly. I mean, Pauline Kael and Dilys Powell and everybody else, the ones we remember, the ones who were important, were very witty and very forceful in their opinions. But you don't know who these people are who are blogging about something. Have they, you don't know if they've ever seen a film that was made before 1999, and this is where I think there's still a value in professional film criticism. The thing is, we can't expect to do this as a job for life. No one's entitled to a job for life in any area. And if 15-year-olds want to read film reviews written by other 15-year-olds, so be it. I just do, maybe it's the grumpy old woman time. I do rather lament the status and the impact that the great film critics had in the past, which doesn't seem to be the case now. Although, wasn't it fascinating that when Roger Ebert died, it was world news, and he was mourned from the White House and all over. He had become such a part of popular culture. And whatever you thought of his film reviews, and I always loved Roger, actually, I thought he always had his finger on the pulse of the mainstream and was entertaining and amusing and took it seriously. I thought, I was amazed, actually. I thought after the passing of Pauline Kael that no film critic was sufficiently famous or widely known to have that kind of, for his passing to be mourned so widely. Not that I don't expect to be remembered. Most of us shouldn't be, don't need to be remembered in that sort of way. And I don't need to feel that I've impacted on anybody's career. But I'll tell you something, one of the nicest compliments I ever had, and it really made me feel like, oh yes, I did a good day's job. I did a good day's work that day. A young woman I met thanked me for a review I'd written years before of Ang Lee's film, Man, Woman, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman. And she said, it had never entered my mind to go see a Chinese film. She said, but you made it sound interesting to me. And she had gone to see it. She had loved it. She'd then gone and seen every Ang Lee film she could. And I'm usually writing about popular mainstream films, although I have Catholic tastes and watch a lot of foreign language films and documentaries and animated films and everything else. But I like to think of myself as a critic. Yeah, as I said, everybody's a critic. I think that there's a lot of confusion about the difference between being a film critic and being a film reporter or a showbiz reporter. I can remember when the film Pearl Harbor came out, they didn't want actual critics to see it, so they flew out a bunch of showbiz reporters to Hawaii, where there was a swell party on a boat in Pearl Harbor, and everyone had Hawaiian cocktails and got to meet the stars. So there were wonderful, wonderful features and photographs all over the world. And this was well before anybody had the chance to see the movie and say, excuse me, it stinks. And I saw somebody on a TV news program berating a journalist about the advertorial nature or the infomercial nature of the coverage that film had. And I thought, the journalist who was the critic was not responsible for any of that. That was an editorial decision. We'll send somebody out there who likes to rub shoulders with the stars. So there was no critical, the critical voice was eliminated. And that's an increasing phenomenon now. So I hate star ratings. Star ratings have been the bane of my existence, and I think a lot of my colleagues would agree with me that we've been kicking and screaming about them ever since they started. You should be able to tell from reading the review what the reviewer thinks of it. And a lot of things, to me, there are very few films. There's a handful of films if you're lucky in the space of a year that would rate 5 stars. Say if you're on a 1 to 5 star rating, and those are brilliant, and it's a real treat to be able to write about those. There are also really very few films that are so appalling and heinous that they would rate no stars or 1 stars. They can also be a great gift to write about because you can go nuts and wax. It's easy to wax witty about something that's an atrocity, but to me, almost, the vast majority of films fall into the category I call, all right, if you like that kind of thing. And they're rather hard to evaluate because they're either there's some people's cup of tea or they're not. And most of the films that get a release in the cinemas in this country would fall into the 3-star category. They're adequately or professionally crafted. They have reasonably appealing or competent or very good actors in them. I expect most films to look good, be reasonably well edited, and so forth and so on, because the level of proficiency around the world is pretty high now. So I don't see the point really in rating things with stars, but we're forced to do it, so there you go. And a lot of times you see something and you think, well, it's really a 2.5 or it's a 3.5, and you're not allowed to do the halves. Evaluation is a bit of a mug's game too, because you cannot second guess the audience. If a critic has readers who read that critic regularly, they come to know what that writer's taste is, and that tells them something right away. Whether they may hate everything that the critic loves, and vice versa, and that's fine. At least they know they can gauge the temperature of the film, but from what you've said, they can guess. I don't think it's my job necessarily to say that something is stupendous or horrible. I think it's my job to tell them what kind of thing it is, and whether I think it succeeds or not in its intent. Having said that, I wish some of the outlets I write for, you can't really write in the first person and you can't get too personal. I'd like to vent more, whether positively or negatively on something. One thing that really gets my goat when I see other reviewers do it is when they say something is crap because they didn't like it, and it's not correct. You have to know the difference between something that is good or bad and something that you like or don't like, if you know what I mean. Something can be very good, but it's absolutely not something that you like. You have to make that you have to be able to make that distinction. I've seen films that are not, I didn't like them, but I can see what's good about them. You have to be able to analyze or see the context or appreciate the aesthetic of something, whether it's to your personal liking or your personal taste or not. And I've seen films that were very well crafted, very well directed, very well acted, that have been dismissed because, the person who saw it was the wrong age group or something. It wasn't their kind of thing, and that does make me furious. Readers always will make up their own minds. There's no such thing as a critic being right or wrong, I suppose, because it's always going to be very subjective. You are necessarily going to bring your own sensibilities into something. And as I said before, you can't second guess the audience. I suspect that still the driving force for people going to the cinema is what their friends thought of something, who went, a few days before. Don't bother, it's terrible, or oh, you got to go see this film, it's fantastic. When I think back, I don't know that there were that many critics. There were critics I read with enjoyment, but I don't know that there were many reviewers who prompted me to see a film or not see a film. unless it was something obscure, small, made by somebody I'd never heard of, had people in it I'd never heard of, and they really raved about it, that might influence me to go see it. But I was always more inclined to go see something because I wanted to see that director's newest film, or there had somebody in it I liked, or it sounded like, it sounded like fun, or it sounded scary, or it sounded exciting.
One last question on star ratings. Have you ever submitted a review and had the star rating changed editorially?
I have submitted things and had star ratings changed, and I've gone crackers. And then, you can have ugly confrontations, and it always ends up with, and then it ends up with, we'll consult you the next time. Or on one occasion, I think twice in my whole career, I've had reviews pulled because the editor or somebody didn't agree with me about the film. There was a film I loved, and the editor hated it. And I said, well, in that case, you should run 2 reviews. Why don't you run my review and next to somebody who hated it? And they decided against doing that. So somebody else reviewed it. I was not happy. But and another time, I wrote a review of something that I didn't hate. I think I gave it a sort of okay or lukewarm review. And then there were financial considerations. There was a big ad, or there were several pages of ads connected with that particular film. So they decided to have somebody else review it, who ended up giving it the same star rating, but was just slightly less obnoxious, apparently, than I had been about it. But it's been rare, and I'm happy to say it's been very rare. Those instances stand out in my mind because they were rare. But you're in a position now where you think, I don't know how badly other people feel their copy gets messed around. I always go insane if anybody makes a so-called correction when they're subbing and it introduces an error. That's happened several times. It happened to all of us, and it makes you absolutely insane. It can be theoretically small things. I remember writing about a reissue of a musical, Rodgers and Hart, and the 12-year-old who was the copy editor had never heard of Lorenz Hart, and instead of looking it up, just assumed it must be Lorenzo Hart. So they put that in, and then I think, everyone thinks I'm stupid. But that's not just film journalists. Any journalist has had experiences like that, and it's part of the frustrations of the profession.
So how?
I'm sorry, I'm about to have a big coughing fit.
Oh, please do.
Sorry, I could feel it coming up.
Yeah, I know, that's horrible.
Okay.
Okay, so how has film criticism changed since you first started in the business?
I think since I first started, film criticism has changed in what the platforms are for doing film criticism. There was a lot more opportunity, I think, in newspapers and magazines. There were more magazines that covered films. In the space of, I can think of one magazine I used to write for, and in the space of the time I wrote for them, it started out with quite good space and a fair amount of interest from the reviews editor in covering, say, exciting French films or something. That was all right, as long as it had somebody good looking in it. If it was foreign, but there was a nice picture, that was fine. I got reasonable space and could pick whichever films I liked. And gradually the space for the words got shorter and shorter and shorter. And eventually the film reviews, they dispensed with a critic altogether. They just ran photographs with basically captions. And some magazines, not through their own fault, turned film reviews into film previews, because there are still long deadline magazines that go to press a few months before they appear on the stands. And because of piracy and paranoia from the film studios and the film distributors, the screening schedule has changed a lot over my time. Once upon a time, you'd see a film 3 months before it opened if you wrote for a magazine, so you had time to think about it and write a considered piece about it. Then there would be a multimedia screening for radio and TV, generally broadcasting people a few weeks before the film came out, and then there would be the national press show the week of release. Now, many films, especially the big expensive ones that they don't want pirated or leaked about, are not shown to anybody until 5 minutes before the film opens. So not only do you have very little time to think about it before you have to go run to the computer and spew out a review, you can't get a review into a long-term publication. That's what, again, all magazines run online sites now so that they can put things up quickly before they open, but they can't always get them into print before they open. And magazines, therefore, some magazines claim they're doing reviews of films, a lot of the women's monthlies and stuff that go to press a long time before they come out. So they are reduced to doing what I'd say are previews, not reviews.
Is print in its death throes?
It certainly seems like print is in its death throes, but I wonder. I mean, they said that about vinyl, and vinyl's come back in the music industry, hasn't it? I suppose it's a generation thing. I still like to hold something in my hand and read it myself, but we're all having to adapt to the rapidly changing digital world. And what I need to know, I need to borrow a 12-year-old from somebody to explain to me how you can earn a living writing things online for the internet.
What future do you actually see for film criticism, and more specifically for the professional film critic, for the paid film critic?
I worry about the future of the professional film critic. I think that arts and culture are beleaguered in our current society anyway, and along with that, the people who write about them in any kind of serious way. And I think that the arts and culture and film specifically are important, because although a lot of what we see is about, we're being sold films about who we think we are and how we think we'd like things to be. I like films, I hope there will always be a place for films that challenge us to, but intellectually and emotionally and imaginatively, to think about what we could be. And the commercial entertainment side of things doesn't want anything to be challenging, because they're too busy selling you the soft drinks or the car or the wristwatch or the next 72 installments of that film franchise. But the fact that there are so many people making films guerrilla style and crowdfunding them and all that opens up a lot of very exciting possibilities. And I think as long as people love movies, there will be people who love writing about movies, and their challenge will be how to make a living doing it. Maybe we don't deserve a living doing it. I've always said it should be working for an insurance company or something. But then all of my friends who worked for insurance companies and things have nice pensions and nice homes. So when you write about something that you're passionate about, you might have to forego some of the financial rewards that people used to expect. I started when I was a kid as a rock journalist because I loved it, and they didn't pay us very much, but the thrill of getting a first copy of something, the smell of a new record, and the thrill of going to a gig and getting to write about something you loved was wonderful. And that's still a great thing about films. I'll tell you, I knew Dilys Powell in her later years, and the thing I always loved about her, and it really impressed me, was that unlike the guys I call the wolf pack, there's always a little mob in the critical confraternity who remind me of the Muppets Statler and Waldorf, who sit in the balcony and criticize everything. Even before it's even started, Dilys used to come almost deaf and very frail on a walking stick, and she always came in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and saying, "Well, what's this about?" She came prepared to be delighted. And then if the film was bad, that was disappointing, that was unfortunate. But she came looking forward to it, whatever it was going to be. Even a teen horror flick, she thought, oh, there might be something good in this. And I thought, that's a great way to approach them.
You mentioned Dilys Powell and Pauline Kael, and I did a little bit of research into early British critics, and was surprised to learn that the two first kind of name critics in the 20s in the UK were both women. Just because it just seemed counterintuitive to me, given the landscape now. And I wonder how you think the current landscape is for female voices in criticism.
I think it's very healthy for female voices in film criticism. When you look around at a national press show, and there are a lot of women there writing for national media, and what coverage there is of film on television and radio is led by some prominent women broadcasters. So I don't think we're in a crisis there. The problem we're all sharing is not gender equality, but earning a living. But when I think back to my favorite critics when I was just reading about films and paying to go see movies every week, most of my favorites were women, and I don't think it was because I was a woman responding to women. I just think, there were some darn good ones. Everyone talks about Dilys and Pauline Kael, but also I used to love Margaret Hinksman in The Mail. She used to crack me up. She retired to write thrillers, God bless her. That seems to be a retirement plan for many film critics over the years. They go off and write thrillers. I suppose it's because we sit through so many, we think we can do better.
And need the views, given that now I'd say the large bulk of criticism that we encounter is online, and most of it is unpaid, not all, but most. Should need the views of a professional or paid critic be valued more than those of an amateur?
I just think that the views of a professional critic, first of all, a professional critic should be, hopefully, somebody who actually knows something of cinema history. As I would say to somebody who wants to be a filmmaker, as to somebody who wants to be a film writer, I would say the best advice I can give is watch a lot of movies. I'm skeptical about some of the so-called unpaid criticism that's online, because there are people who get invited to the set, to the locations, and get wined and dined, and their goodwill is bought. They're not necessarily an unbiased lone voice in the wilderness running a website. You don't know who they're pally with and what benefits they're getting out of it. So I'm still wary of things online unless I actually know who the person is that's writing these reviews. I think the value of a professional critic is that they see more than most people. Hopefully have seen many films from around the world, from going back to the beginning of cinema, and therefore have a perspective. I mean, if you're 12 years old, the first time you see a romantic comedy or something, you think it's the greatest movie ever made in the world. After you've seen 1,000 of them, you can tell whether it was actually a good one, a bad one, or an indifferent one. So perspective and I guess a sense of history helps. I suppose there's a temptation in criticism to be a little bit, not jaded, but to hark back to past films. Every time you see something, you think, well, they've lifted this from that, they've lifted that from that, and this, it's paying homage to this, it's pastiching that, it's referencing that. A lot of normal people don't care about that. But it's inevitable. But I think it's a good thing to know when you see a Quentin Tarantino film, you get the in-jokes if you've seen the films that he's seen, and that makes for a more interesting look at his film if you can talk about the influences that have gone into it.
And I guess this isn't really a question, but it's just an invitation. If there's anything else you'd like to say about film criticism that we haven't covered.
Oh gosh, this is terrible, isn't it? I came in ahead of time thinking that we've probably covered a couple of things. The other, one of the things that makes me laugh is that people who hear what you do for a living, or who want to do what you do for a living, think that you are rubbing shoulders with film stars and you're going to premieres all the time, which film critics rarely do. And I don't think film critics and filmmakers should necessarily be friends. It makes it very difficult to, if you actually know somebody quite well and their film comes out, it can be, well, sometimes you just have to pass, or sometimes you have to say at the beginning, I happen to know so-and-so, so I'm biased. But it makes life very difficult. And the other thing is that people think it's like falling off a log. They think you go to 1 or 2 films a week. Well, the dream job in the sky is the job where, the handful of critics who do see maybe 2 or 3 films a week, and then they get a chance, at least a day to think about them, and they write one large column while somebody else runs off and does all of the smaller films. Sometimes many more, sometimes not as many, because they're coming out thick and fast all the time. They seem to be making more movies and more movies and more movies. And you have to sit through a lot of rubbish, and you sit through a lot of banal stuff. So it is a job. It's easy to be funny about something that's awful, and it's a gift to be able to be passionate about something that's brilliant. But to write interestingly, or entertainingly, or anything about the bulk of movies is quite an effort. A lot of films are here today, gone tomorrow movies. This is why I have to take notes and everything, because 2 days later I might have forgotten a lot about something if I didn't make a few memos to myself about it. So I think people who think we just go in, get handed a drink, and watch 1 or 2 movies at our leisure, and then act smart alecky about it, totally misunderstand what we have to do.
Okay, thank you very, very much.
Oh, sorry. I hope that was all right.
That's been great.
I hope there's something in there.
Yeah, I think there's plenty. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you.